Hello everyone and welcome to the demonstration video, and in this video we're going to go over arrays. So what exactly is an array in the first place? Well, an array is considered a data structure, and specifically when it comes to Java, it's a data structure that allows us to store multiple values of the same data type. So why would we want to go ahead and use a data structure like this? Well, I'll give an example with something for instance, grades. So let's say we have a classroom full of, maybe 10, 20 students. In this case, we'll just do 10 students. And each one will have a grade for a certain assignment. This assignment is out of 100 points. So maybe you'll keep track of these students. Maybe you'll have it, some people will go like, okay, so we have different variables, S1, S2, S3, and let's just go up to S4 for now. So student 1, student 2, student 3, and student 4. And maybe you'll set these variables to, so we'll use the equal sign to assign each of these variables with some kind of int. So all of these will be of the data type int. And I'll just point an arrow down. And each one will have their own value. So maybe this student got 100, this one got a 98, this one's cutting it close with a 67, and then this one, let's do 80. So some people will do this, in which they try to keep track of different students with different variables. However, what if, let's say you have a whole bunch of students, so in this case we said 10, that would be a lot of variables you're keeping track of. If you want to, let's say, update each of those grades, for instance, if they have some kind of extra credit, you'd have to go in and edit every single variable. Not only that, what if we have, let's say, students that drop out from the course, students that are added in? Basically, we get the idea that if we already have a group of students that kind of have noticed that they have the same data value, so data type for each of these scores, and they're already kind of going in a bit of a sequential order, a grouping, then you could turn it into its own data structure. And so instead of doing variables for each of them, why not just have kind of a single box for all of these students? So in this case, it would be an array. More specifically, if we want to say like a grouping of a certain data type, we would say this is an array of integers. I'll just put array of int. And we'll just call this students, plural. Or grades, however you would like to say it. So like student grades. Actually, in this case, it would be a lot more better if we just said grade. Because later on in the course, we'll go over classes, which that's a whole separate story. But for now, just know different data types we could store all together. Well, that's a small, there we go. You can store all together in an array. So let's just call this grades for a single assignment. So now when we create an array, let's look at it like this. So let's go ahead. So we have a giant box. Actually, I should go ahead and use the features for the MS Word, not MS Word, MS Paint. There we go. So we have a giant box. And we could section this off. We could basically say, hey, I have, let's stick to 4 students. So I have 4 students. We'll tell the array, hey, I have 4 students. So we'll go ahead and create a box for each of those students. There we go. 1, 2, 3, and this will be 4. And each of these boxes will store one of these grades. So maybe this one will represent the first student. So we'll put in 100. This one will represent the next student, so that's 98. This one the next, 67, and this one 80. And there we go. And that would basically be what the array is. We have one giant box that we just call grades, and we could say which tiny box we want to get to in order to get the grade for a specific student. In this case, that would actually be called indexes. So I'll show you how to do that with Java. Indexes, you could think of it as kind of addresses for each of these tiny boxes in the array. Indices always start at 0. So this box is labeled 0, and then it increments up. So this would be 1, this is 2, 3, and so on. And do note, again, we say array of integers, so array of int, because we're only holding numbers in here. You could have an array of doubles, in which these can all be doubles now. You could even have an array of strings, which all of these would be strings. So just keep that in mind. But no, if we mention grades, so just normal grades, that would be the variable, but that variable is holding this entire box. So let me get in some red. This would be this entire box. If I say arrays index 0, so this 0 right here, we're talking about just this part of the box, this value within grades. If I want to get grades at index 2, we're only referring to this box over here, the one with the 67, that value. So this is what we'll be working with, and notice if I do want to update everyone's grades to maybe give them 5 points extra credit, in some cases, like in our courses, there may be an evaluation survey and all students get extra credit for it. Instead of going to each and every single minute variable to update it, I could just use some different Java structures to go through all of grades as an array and update everything. So let's see how that looks with code itself. Okay, so I went ahead and created a new class. This one's simply called week 7. And there's a simple way in which we could do basically just arrays in Java. We're going to use the same idea as last time with the different student grades. So I'm going to go ahead. If we want to say, let's say an array of integers, all you have to do is remember to indicate the data type. So I'll say int, and instead of saying the variable name, we're actually going to go ahead. We're first going to do these square brackets. So this is important. This basically tells Java that, hey, this isn't just an int variable. This is an array of int variables, of integers. And then you can name it. So now we could say grades, and we'll leave it at that. So this is basically declaring, hey, here exists an array of integers named grades. Now this enough isn't sufficient to create a variable that holds an array. This is kind of just a placeholder saying this exists, but we actually haven't created the array yet. Remember, when we say array of integers, we have to, in this case, we had to indicate, hey, we want 4 students, and it creates, earlier we created the box with 4 different smaller boxes in it. So that's the part we do need to do here. And there's different ways in going about that. One, so let's say you don't know the values that you want in each box, but you know how many tiny boxes you need. In this case, actually instead of 4 students, let's do 10. So to do that, first you're going to say new. So you're going to say, hey, we're creating a new array. Then indicate the data type, which is going to be the same as the one you put here. So int. Then we're going to do our square brackets again. But inside the square brackets, we're going to put the number of different tiny boxes that's going to be in there. Actually, going back here, each of these tiny boxes is what we call an element. So when I say elements, I'm talking about an individual box. So this number indicates how many individual elements we're going to have in this array. So if I want 10, I put in 10. And so now this has gone ahead, and again, let me do another visual representation. This has gone ahead and basically done that big giant box, and it's created 10 bunch of tiny little boxes in here. I'll just do a line to do that. So just tiny little boxes. Whoop. I actually don't know how many I created here, but just think of it that way, that we've created this blank space with the 10 little boxes. Okay, So that's one way to go about it. So again, this is if you know the number of elements, not the values. Now, if you do know what kind of values you already want in there, let's say you already know the grades of each of the students. Let me go ahead and comment this out, and I'm going to copy this beginning part. So you'll still set it up with the int square brackets name of the variable equal sign, but instead of doing this part where we indicate the size, we're going to go ahead and use curly braces. There we go. And we'll start putting our values in here. So we're going to put all 10 values within here. So maybe the first student, again, it was 100. And every time you're doing a separate value, separate it with a comma. So this is the first student, comma, and then this is the next student. So maybe this is also 100, comma, 80, comma, 90, comma, and I'll keep on filling this up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. And so now this here, these are 10 different elements I've specified, and this will be the set size for the array. So you could think of this part over here as creating this box, but it's already populated everything with the element. So it was like 100, the first one is 100, and so on. So it already populates everything. But it will keep the size to 10 boxes. So these 10 boxes are the ones that we could work with currently. So these are two separate ways to create an array. So this is more of, you know, the values and size. Now for either case in which you've created the array, you can go ahead and edit the values within them. So remember, this one is just empty boxes. This one over here, so this one, it still has the boxes, just the boxes are occupied. So like in the case of here, let's work on the one with the empty boxes. If we want to start populating it, we're going to go ahead and here, I need my system.out print line. There we go, just so we can see the output down here. So if we want to, let's say, set the first variable to 100, so we're trying to replicate this, we're actually going to go ahead over here and say, hey, so grades, and there we go, so we're saying the array, but we want to say the array at the first position. Remember, it starts at 0, so we're going to say at index 0. To do that, we use our square brackets again. And in those square brackets, we indicate the index we want to refer to. So in this case, we want the first box, so we say 0. And you could treat this like a variable. We could go ahead and say equals and add in our own value, like in this case 0. And now down here, if I say grades, square brackets 0, so you're basically saying grades at index 0, this will print out 100. So let's go ahead and run this. There we go, and it says 100. If I want to set, let me copy this, if I want to set the next box, again, at index 0, and then we could go to index 1, you'll just change the value here. So grades at index 1, we set that box to, let's copy what we have up here. So this is 100. If we want to get that value and print it out, let's go ahead, print that out with system.out.println grades at index 1. There we go. Run that. Now they're both at 100. And we could do the same thing here. 2. This one's 80. And let's print out at index 2. Whoop. There we go. Run that, and there we go. Now you can see that this is 100. So the first box is 100, second box 100, next box 80. based on how we set it here. Now, if I try to print out the next one, but I remember this is a bunch of empty boxes, we've set the first, second, and third box, but not the fourth. But if I want to get the fourth one, grades at index 3, let's see what happens. There we go. And you notice it gives me a 0 even though I haven't set anything. Do you know that there are defaults when it comes to arrays? So in this case, if we set an array of integers with the size but no values, it'll set everything to 0. Same thing with doubles, everything will be set to 0 as well. Just be careful when it comes to strings. It won't send you an empty string. In most cases, it'll send something called null. And actually, let me show that real quick. So let me go ahead. If we want to create an array of strings, you could say string. Don't forget your square brackets. That's saying this is an array of strings. Let's call these names. And let's go ahead and do new string 10 names. There we go. So if I try to print out, let's say, the first box in names, but I haven't set anything, so names at 0. Remember, this is all empty. We've just indicated those boxes. Let's see what comes out here for Eclipse. There we go. You see it sends out null, basically saying that there's not even anything within that part of the box. So do note, when it comes to strings, it'll come out as null. It won't have like the weird space. Okay, but let's comment out the strings part for now, just because I just want to work with integers. But do know that it is going to work the same way. You could still set the arrays in this way and get the values that you've set here. Okay, let me go ahead and comment all of these out, and let's work with the second version that we had, just because it's a little easier. There we go. So this version where we set the size and we already know all of the values. Okay. So the cool thing about this is, notice it's kind of tedious to go one by one and in this case print out everything. But remember when we were doing different loops, we had different countdowns that we could pretty much create with that. So we could actually use loops to our advantage. So instead of having a whole line, like if we want to print out all of these grades, we don't have to keep making each of these system.out print lines. That would be very tedious, especially if, let's say, you had 100 grades to handle. That would be a lot of lines of code. No, we could do this in just a couple of lines. So for instance, I would recommend that you use a for loop when it comes to arrays. And I'll show you two different ways in which you could use a for loop for it. So let's go ahead and set up our for loop. So remember for, set up our parentheses, and then do our opening and closing braces. Okay. And let's go ahead. We still have to initialize our counter. So in this case, int I equals, and it is best to start out at 0. I'll show you why in a second. So start out at 0. There we go. And then you're going to say I is less than, and right now we know the size of our array, 10. So you could go ahead and put 10. I'll show you something else you can include there. And then you're going to say I plus plus. So we're going to increment all the way from 0 to 9. Okay. So if this is going from 0 to 9, remember here, let's go over here. Remember that when we're looking at the arrays, these are different boxes, and starting from the very beginning, this is at index 0, so that part. This is at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. It doesn't go up to 10 because the index starts at 0. So that's why we want this to go from 0 to, and it needs to stop at 9. So we're saying less than 10. So if this will go up to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we could directly use this index to access each part of the grades. Let's see how that works. So we'll actually just copy and paste this system.out print line, grades, and instead of some number, we're going to get that counter variable, so I, and replace it there. There we go. So now if I run this, notice with just basically 3 lines of code, I'll go ahead and run, and it shows me all of the values within my array. So that's pretty neat. Instead of having to do 10 different lines, system.out.println lines, you just have one, and you have an array going through this. Okay, if you wanted to go backwards, so here, let me separate this by saying increasing order, and then this is decreasing order. Okay, so if you want this to go backwards, you could pretty much do the same formatting for the for loop. But instead we're going to flip the I. So we're going to start at 9, and then it has to be greater than or equal to 0. There we go. So now if I run this part is increasing order, so from 0 to 9, so it'll read everything from here to the end. This is decreasing order, so we start at 9, this index, and it goes all the way to the end to 0. So let's see what happens. There we go. And actually, it seems like I myself did an error. So let's take a look at what's going on here. There we go. I ran it again because there's another weird exception that occurred. But notice that when I tried doing decreasing order, it gave me an error, exception in thread main, index out of bounds. 10 out of bounds for length 10. Now you could pause the video to kind of wonder what that means. Okay, and if you come back, I'll show you real quick. So notice when I updated my for loop, I didn't decrease my I. So I actually went from 9 to 10. Now remember, let's go back here. If I've indicated, so this is box 0, and if we go down all the way to box 9, there is no 10 passed here. That's what we call an out of bounds index. We're trying to access something that doesn't exist. So in this case, it tried accessing 10, kind of draw it down there, but it no longer exists. It doesn't exist. We've never declared it with this array. So that's when you get this error. So every time you see this array index out of bounds exception, just know that there's some kind of variable that's being accessed that's outside those boxes. So in my case, I just have to flip this to minus minus, so now it goes from 9 to 8. Okay, so if we run this, there we go, and you see it goes backwards, so from 9 to 0. And that's what I wanted here. Okay. So if you ever get, let's say this starts printing out and at the very end it says index out of bounds, maybe you probably accidentally, like in this case, you maybe said less than or equal to, which would go to 10, and that would be out of bounds. Even negative numbers will put it out of bounds, so just keep that in mind. Okay, but that would be different ways in which you could utilize an array structure with different for loops. So again, I recommend for loops. Another way to go about this, so if you want to go in increasing order, let me go ahead here, let's print down here using for each. So there is a specific for loop, and it works like this. So we're going to say for, set up the parentheses, and then do our braces. Now instead of doing this structure for the for, we're just going to say for every, so we're going to say int a colon in grades. There we go. So this means for every int a in this array called grades. Basically, we're saying every time it's going to increment in increasing order, so from 0 to 9, through every single element in the array. So if you have nothing special going on, you just want to print everything out, you could use this. And instead of, let's say, accessing grades, what's going to be stored at int is the value at that point of the incrementing. So I could just say system.out.println print A. So if we run this, there we go. So this is our using for each, and you see it's the same thing as our increasing order. So it'll just go through every single existing element and then stop in increasing order. So A is the equivalent to, so A equals grades at what I would be. So that is a different way in which you could do it. But again, if you want to do it, let's say backwards, you have to go ahead and use some kind of for loop that with the set initialization, updating, and such. Okay. Now let's move on to the next example, which I'm going to set up real quick. All right, so I've gone ahead and implemented the version of arrays which we have the empty boxes. We haven't set any values. So if I want to, let's say, have some kind of user input to give a value to each of these, I will go ahead and here, let's do a while. So we're going to have some kind of user choice, and actually before I do that, we need the scanner. So don't forget your scanner, which I already have imported. Perfect. So let's create our scanner up here just so we don't forget. So scanner.stdin equals new scanner system.in. There we go. And let's do a while loop, and we're gonna have some kind of, here, let's, oh, my bad. It'll be an int, I'll call that choice, equals, let's say 0 for now. So while choice does not equal, let's say, -1. So what I'm going to do is, instead of the program setting the values, I'm going to allow the user to set the values of each part of the array. So let's go ahead and let's say here, we'll just prompt the user insert new grade. So let's go ahead, system.out.println. Within these parentheses, I'm going to say insert new grade. There we go. And then we're going to get the choice. So choice equals stdin.nextInt. Perfect. And now what some people will try to do is, okay, since we're going through the while loop, let's have another variable called counter. That's going to start at 0. So if we're trying to do different new grades, we're going to go ahead and say, so choice, we get the user's choice, and then we're going to insert the variable at the given counter. So we're going to say grades at counter equals whatever the choice was. And even before that, we do have to say if choice does not equal -1. There we go. Let's put that within that if. Just because if it's -1, we want this to completely stop. If not, we'll go ahead and add that new grade to choice, to your grades. There we go. Okay. So we have this going, and don't forget to update that counter. We need that, so that way it goes from 0 to 1. So let's see how this works. And actually, to see specifically how it's working, let's have it display the current grades after every iteration. So let's just use this old, there we go, this old for loop, copy and paste. And let me have it print within here. And let's just do another output, so we could say current current grades. There we go. And let's do a /n just to differentiate. There we go. Remember, this is a line break. Perfect. So now if I run this, it's going to say, ask me to insert a new grade. Let's say 100. There we go. And now the first one is set to 100 current grades. Perfect. Let's set a new grade. This one is 90. There we go. And we're filling it up. You can see it's slowly filling up, replacing the 0 with the 90. So the purpose why I'm showing this is, let's say with this while loop, I say 80. Okay, let's do another 80, another 90. We got, nope, not 200, 100. Let's say we have a 65, another 80, a 90, another 100, another 100. And I could, oh, there we go. And you could see that I could have stopped with -1, exited out of the loop, but what I did is entered another number, and it's saying, hey, we're trying to insert something at a box that doesn't exist, so it's giving me the error. Now let me go ahead, exit out of here. Actually, it's already exited, so let's clear this. So this is one way in which people would, let's say, populate that array, which can work, especially if you, let's say, use a for loop to have it stop after 10 iterations. But what if I want to do an array that we don't know the exact size? So again, maybe we're actually getting different results from a unspecified group of people. So we don't know how many people we're getting grades from. Even let's say if it's like a poll, you're getting some kind of research, you may not know exactly how many people are going to be answering these questions or maybe doing this test or whatever for these grades. The only thing about this structure, so this array structure, is that it has a set value. In the notes I've provided and in the readings, they provide methods in which you can increase the size. So like, let's say if we wanted to add more than 10 grades and we added something that's above that, you could go ahead and increase it with those methods. But we want to use a different way. So let me go ahead and comment all of this out. And we're going to use a different array structure, which will actually allow us to add basically a near infinite amount of elements. This new structure is what we call an ArrayList. And actually, to use an ArrayList, just like how we imported the scanner here, you would have to go ahead and import the same thing. It's java.util ArrayList. But since we're using multiple classes from the java.util package, you could go ahead and just say java.util.asterisk, which is saying, hey, you want to use all the classes within this package, and ArrayList is one of them. Okay, so let's go ahead and start creating basically the same array, but using a different method. So to use ArrayList, you're going to go ahead and you're actually going to indicate, hey, I'm going to create an ArrayList. So capital A, capital L, no space in between. Then you're going to use these angle brackets. So the less than sign and the greater than sign. And in those, that's where you're going to put the data type. So in this case, if we want to use integers, the only tricky thing about this is you're actually going to use the entire name integer with a capital I. This will be explained later on, but just know ArrayList is what we consider a class. And classes this class specifically works with other classes. So integer is a class in its own, but still it uses the integer data type. So just know that you can't put int in here. You have to use integer. And then same thing with doubles. You would have to do a capital D double. Strings are fine, capital S. Integer, you have to do the entire word, capital I. So just know that. So once you've indicated, hey, this is an ArrayList, and it's going to be an array of integers, Then you could give it the name. So we're going to go ahead and keep using grades. And then we have to go ahead and actually still declare that, hey, this is an array list. So to do that, you say new array list, angle brackets, and then parentheses. Perfect. And you don't need to put in the data type in the angle brackets. You don't need to put in anything for the parentheses. You could just leave this as such. And what this does is basically this will create, you could think of this as, hey, let me go ahead and delete this. There we go. So with an array list, it's saying, hey, we have this box. And if I keep on adding elements to this array, it'll start cutting this up into different boxes. So hey, this will be, okay, so we have an array here, here. This is considered size 0, so there's nothing in it yet. If we add an element, it'll create a tiny box, put in whatever values in there. Okay, index, now it's size 1. If we add another element, it'll create another box, size 2, index 0, 1, which are accessible. And if we keep on adding on, maybe this is 2, there we go. Let me just cut this up first. If we keep on adding elements, 3, 4, 5, 6, the thing here is if we add something that's outside the size, so if we want to add another element, it'll just go ahead and create more space for it. So that's the thing about ArrayList, it'll go ahead and create that space for you as compared to the other way in which we just used the square brackets, the size was fixed. So note, let me go ahead and write this down for you. ArrayList, you could say, is dynamic. In simpler terms, you could say it changes. So it changes size. Whereas just a simple array is what we call static, and it has a fixed size. So just keep that in mind. And if you do want to expand the size of array, you're going to have to go through a bunch of hurdles and loops to do that. Where ArrayList, it'll expand for you. So let's see how that works. So to use this version, you could just go ahead and here. If we want to add a new grade, instead of doing the version up here where we say, hey, grades at this box, set it. Again, remember, there's no boxes currently. It's size 0. You'll use a function to add elements. So we're actually going to say, so the array grades dot add. So the function is add. We're going to use our parentheses, and within those arguments, notice that it sets it to null, but you could insert a value. So in this case, we're going to say 100. And I'm going to go ahead here. We're going to do the same thing, so you could still access this array list with your for each loop. So if I run this, there we go. You see, it is, we now have an 100. If I want to add more, let's say this one is going to be 80. There we go. And this will iterate through all of our array list. Let's run this, 180. And notice it will not give me any issues with, let's say, going out of bounds. So if I do want to use this same thing, so we're going to do this same, in this case we're going to say the while loop. So I'm just going to steal that code. And we're going to replace this for loop. There we go. Oh, and I forgot that we need the scanner and the choice. I'll put it under here with our array list declaration. Get rid of this add. Perfect. And notice we do have to change this because we're not using the previous version of arrays. Instead of indicating the box and adding choice, we're going to say dot add and then put choice in parentheses. Where you don't need to update the counter. There we go. So now if I run this, we could insert a new grade. I could say 1, and notice that it doesn't go through the rest. Previously you saw that I had a whole bunch of zeros. This is the only element within the array list. So this is the only one that exists. It'll only print that out. If I start adding new stuff, so 100, it expands. 5, and notice it will not give me any errors. So if I keep on adding stuff, it won't give me errors even if I go past 10. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If I add in another value and I add in another one once more, you see that it gives me no issues. I could keep on expanding this. And in this case of my program, it won't stop unless I put in -1, end of program. Okay, but that's the beauty about the array list. You don't have to worry about the size. You could just go ahead and keep on adding. Now, if you don't want to use this, maybe you want to get a specific value at a certain point of this array. Let's go ahead, and in this case, maybe we want to get just the very first value. So we want to print out the first value. You'd say grades dot get. So if you want to get a specific index, this works like the grades and the brackets. There we go. But we would get it at whatever index we want. So this would lead to the first value. So if I do this, let's do a wacky number for the first one, like 1, 2, 3. There we go. Add in a couple more. And if I stop this program, -1, you see that, there we go. Get will return the first, or not the first, get 0 index will return the first. If I said get 1 index, I'll get the second, and so on. Only thing is, of course, if I'm still accessing an index that's out of bounds, it'll give me that error. So just keep that in mind. But in terms of adding, it's infinite. If you have an existing box and you want to set it to a new value, so let's say we want to change the first one. So the very first element to some other value, you would say grades.set, and maybe with this one we just want to turn it to 100. There we go. Don't forget your semicolon. Perfect. So now no matter what I put in for the very first element, this will set it. And why is it doing that? Because there's actually 2 parts to this. My bad. So actually here, you have to say what index you actually want to set the value of. So if we want to set the first, you say 0. And then you say the value you want to replace it with. So in this case, 100. There we go. If I did, so let's do the same thing, grades.set index 3 to 80, this one would replace value at index 3. That would be the 4th variable, or the 4th element, to 80. There we go. So if I run this, let's say the first one is a score of 7. Next one is a score of 100. Next one is a score of 100, and so on. If I stop this, now you see, there we go. Even though this first element here is 7, I've set it to 100, and we print that out as, there we go. We print that out, and we could see it changed to 100. Okay. But that's how you would use the array list. So do keep that in mind when it comes to adding new elements. It's infinite. The only thing that does change is if you want to change an existing box, you have to use set. And if you want to get a value from a specific box, so a specific index, you have to use get. So don't forget those three functions. You have add, set, and get. An extra thing I can go over, so I'm going to go ahead here. Let me comment this out. There we go. And let's go ahead, I'm going to go back to the old here. So the old version of arrays that's fixed equals new int, oh, not 0, 10. There we go. And I'm going to use the system.out print line. So there is a function, remember up in our for loop over here, we had to indicate size 10. But what if you don't know the exact size of your array? What if it's something that you can't quite put within your for loop, or maybe it's changed at some point? So there is a way to actually get the size of the array itself without you having to go in and change the code. And it's different for when it comes to an array list and a normal array. In the case of normal arrays, that's going to look like, so you still get the name of the array, so in this case grades, and then you're going to say length. There we go. So length is actually a property of this array. So if I run this, it should say 10. There we go. If I change the size to, let's say 100, and I run this, it'll say that the size is 100. There we go. So you could use that instead of directly putting in that size for the for loops. Now if we want to do the same thing here, so I'm gonna, instead of using the for each, let's go ahead and use here. So let's steal this scheme, and we're going to print everything out in the end. So starting at 0, and remember, since we're using ArrayList, we have to change this to get I, so get the value at that index. And since we don't know the size, and remember, this is going to keep updating. And actually, let's get rid of this part. There we go. It's going to keep updating based on how many grades the user wants to put in. So we don't know exactly if there's going to be 10. So if we want the exact size, either again use the for each, or you could say, in the case of an array list. So with an array list, you have to say here, so we're going to say grades dot size parentheses. So it is different for ArrayList. ArrayList uses the size function to get how many elements are in it. Normal arrays use length, so keep that in mind. So if I run this, enter new grade, we're going to say 100, 100, 80, 90, this one's 55, let's do another 100, and let's stop there. So -1, and you see it goes through without any issues. If I said 10, we would have gotten out of bounds because it would have reached elements that didn't exist. If I, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I said array size of 5, we would miss out on this last element. So just know you could use the size, and this is a recommended practice. Okay. Now another extra thing, let me comment this out. Is within the notes I provided, you probably saw something called a 2D array. Let me clear this out first. But let's say you have so right now we're working with something called 1D data, which that means, let me do a comment. We have just a single list of values, so like 100, 1, 2, 3, etc. Sometimes when you represent data, you're going to need something that's more of like a 2D matrix. So something with rows and columns. So like you could depict different data with that. it would look something a little more like this, where this right here would actually have 2 rows, 4 columns. I'm just making stuff up right now. It's just some numbers. 5, there we go. So to do something like that, there's different ways in which you could create an array structure that's 2D. So again, you can think of it as rows and columns. Maybe you're trying to depict some kind of chart. This would be the best way to do it. So in the case of a normal array, all you would do is, so start out your integers. So int array, so int square brackets, and then you'll put in another square brackets. So what you're saying is, hey, I'm actually creating an array of integers. So again, if we just have a whole bunch of, there we go, different arrays, you could put those within an array itself. So you can think of it as a bit of an array inception. If you want a visual of that, let me go ahead and erase this. You could think of it as, okay, so here we're creating a big box. And in this big box, we have rows of boxes. So just think of this red as rows of boxes. There we go. So instead of so same thing, each box represents its own index, 0, 1, 2, 3. But these big boxes are arrays themselves, so you have a bunch of tiny boxes in them. Whoop, I am getting a little off. There we go. And these also have their indices. So this would be here. So 0, remember we still always start at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Of course it would look better as a cleaner grid if I went straight across, but I just wanted to show that each one has its own little boxes. So if you want to get a value here, you would have to say, hey, so start at the bigger box. So at this box 1, look for the index in the box 2. So you go, okay, so big box 1 at index 1, and in index 1 we're looking at index 2. So this would be 2. And then you would get that value there. So that's what we would do with 2D arrays. Oh. And same thing, you would name it here. Maybe we still want to do, let's just call these values. If you want to give it preset size, you go ahead, new int, and you indicate how many. Remember, the first one is, you could think of as rows, columns. Just think of this example. You could say 10, and then the amount of rows, 10. There we go. Just as a bit more of a visualizer, let's do this. So let's do, actually I want to use the for each. So remember we say for each. In this case we can't say int. Remember this is an array of arrays. So you have to say int square brackets a colon values. There we go. So if I just print that out on its own, it's going to come out with something weird. Let's see what happens here. There you go. Notice it gives random numbers. It looks like gibberish. This is actually addresses in which the arrays are located. So instead of giving us values, it's giving us addresses. So if we want to access the values within a 2D array, you still have to say, so in this case, since A is an array, you can still use the for each loop for it. So for each, now we could say int because we're at the value part. So for each int, let's call this B. In A, we're going to print out B. And just so we could emphasize this, let's not do print line, let's just do print, and then let's concatenate separated by commas, or in this case just spaces. And then when it ends, so when this loop ends, we printed out all of that single row. We'll go ahead and print a line break. So now if I run this, remember we haven't set any values, so it's going to be a whole entire box of zeros. 10 columns, 10 rows. So that's how you would do a 2D structure, and there are pretty cool things you can do with that. If you want to set values already, let's say, so again you still set it up as int. Let's say this is, again let's do values, let me comment this out. And if you want to give direct, values, I would say start out with your curly braces. There we go. Let's go down here. This is still going to be the same data structure. So within those curly braces, you're going to make curly braces and then say in this case 1, 2, 3, comma, next one, and make sure you keep it to the same lengths. So maybe this is 4, 5, 6, comma, 7, 8, 9. There we go. So now if I run this, now this will appear. And if we want to change a certain value, values, again you're going to have to say, whoop. In this case maybe we want to change a certain part. Let's experiment here. So if we want the first, okay, so the first row, let's say 0. If we want to change the 2 to maybe 3, remember 0, 1, there we go. So let's say, so first column at 0, first row, so this is 0, at column 1, 1. So if you played Battleship, you could think of it as that. Let's set that to 3. So now this will change. If we run this, there we go. You see it changes from 1 to a 3. So that's why I indicated this over here. You could take a screenshot of this version. Just know that the first number indicates the row, second number the column. So for setting values, you would do that. If you're using this iteration of the for loops where you actually have an int I with some kind of counter, do remember that you could still get the lengths, just know whether you're grabbing, remember this is an array itself, so you have to get the value of that. Then it comes to individual values, so that's why you have this here. So just keep that in mind. When it comes to ArrayList, it would work similarly. Instead, within the data type, you could say either create a normal array or you could add an ArrayList within this data type. You would just have to manage the get values appropriately. If you want to learn more about those fun parts, you could message me with the Canvas inbox and I would be more than welcome to go over it with you. Okay, but I'll leave it at that. Again, those are 2 extra things that you could take a look at. Within your assignment, there is an extra credit opportunity asking about queues and dequeues. Just know they're similar to ArrayLists. You're just going to have to read into exactly how they work and what functions you need to use for those. As a quick refresher of how queues work, remember, think of a line. We have this box here. If you add in the value, there we go, you'll have a value here. Maybe this is 2. If you add in another value, you get 3. If you want to remove a value from the stack, so remember there's a specific function for that, it works like the line. So if you have a line, maybe this is a line for some kind of fast food, you'll take the person that came first. So you'd get rid of this person. There we go. Took care of this person. And then now this is the first person. So remember, that's how it's going to be working. If you add more people, or in this case more values, Let's just add in random stuff. Remember, adding, it adds it to the back. Removing, it'll take off the one at the top. And then now the next person is shifted over as first, and so on. So just remember that's a queue. Think of it as a line. A stack, instead of thinking of it as a line, think of it as different plates. So here, we're gonna think of this as a chute. If you add an item, or in this case a value, think of it as plates. So we'll say, hey, this is 2. Add another plate 3. Let's add another plate, which maybe this value is 10. If I'm removing it, instead of a queue where we get the first one that appeared, you're actually going to go ahead and take off the top. That's why we call it a stack. You can think of it as a stack of plates. So let's remove this. There we go. So 10 is taken off, and then now 3 is the first. Then you would go 3, remove that. Now 2 is the first. Then you can remove 2, and so on. So that's only the brief thing I will tell you about stacks and queues. Remember queue. That's an ugly way of spelling queue. Just think of it as a line. So a line waiting for fast food, a line waiting for some kind of ride, a line in the bank. Think of it as that. Stack. Think of it as adding plates. Or let me just put plates. Whoop. Just keep that in mind. You have a line of different people. Stack, think of it as a literal stack. How would you add stuff to it? How would you remove things from it? Okay. Well, I will leave that again at that. Again, if you need help, send me a message. All right. I will see you guys in the next video.